How's it going, guys? I am Folkerman, your local brick built historian, with another episode of Brick Built History. Today we are taking a look at one of the most famous French fighters of World War One, the Nieuport 17. Now, this is, of course, Brickmania's kit of the Nieuport 17 Hollywood edition. And if you've ever seen the movie Flyboys, it's probably pretty familiar looking. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the box, do a review of the kit, and then get into the history. So, Nieuport 17 Hollywood Edition World War I fighter aircraft contains 281 Lego and brick arm elements with one minifig by Cody Cell. Cool monochromatic image of a side shot. You can see the Jevo tool insignia used by the character. You have the manufacturing plate. So, Brickmania, Nieuport 17, World War I fighter, Cody Cell, kit 452, 3 out of 5, and all of that information again. So, move this over to the side. Take a look at the actual kit. So, I opted not to do the full Flyboys garb because I actually want to change this to either Charles Nungessa or Albert Ball. I haven't made a decision yet, but when I do, I'll do an update video of that. But let's take a look at the aircraft. So you have a nice brick-built propeller, which spins beautifully. You have a nice little wood grain on the propeller too, which I was unsure of at first. I'm like, it still looks blocky, but you know, I warmed up to it, so you know, I like it. You got a nice cowling. I've noticed this is a very popular way of doing a cowling of a radial or rotary engine, which, by the way, the Nieuport would have a rotary engine, although you wouldn't be able to tell with the fact that it's stationary here. But this is a very common way of them doing the cowling, and it's got the printed stripes on it, which is what the character, I think it's supposed to be Cassidy. It's either Cassidy or Rawlings. I'm not exactly 100% sure. Maybe Rawlings, but Rawlings didn't have the Lewis gun on the top. Then you have a Vickers machine gun in front of the pilot here, just like how the Nieuport would. I always enjoy how they make their World War I undercarriages, because I guess it's because they're fixed and you can make them as sturdy as you want without having to worry about them folding up. I also really enjoy how they do this inverted tire. That's a fun little thing to do. It's I would never have thought about that myself. Then you have the big top wing going to a tiny bottom wing right here, which I'll explain about that later. But it's really sturdy. That's what I like about their planes, is that they're all really sturdy. I can grab it from the outside of the wing. You have the pilot here, either Cassidy or Rawlings. I'm not exactly sure who it's supposed to be, but you know, it's one of the two. It's Lego, so the faces kind of look similar, whether it's going to be one or the other. And then you have the Jevo tool with the eagle, and then something in German that I'm not sure what it says exactly. Going down through the fuselage with the horizontal stabilizer and the rudder. Nice brick-built tri-stripe there. But it does have working ailerons, but those are the only those are the only surfaces that move. So overall, this was pretty easy to build. There's a lot of cool building techniques that they use, of course, because they always do. I always find myself like discovering something new about how to build by these guys. That's why I always enjoy it. There is some things like the cowling spins. So this part was probably the most difficult, trying to get it like perfect. The only other one I have with a cowling like this so far built, it came from the vault, so it was pre-built, so I didn't really mess with it too much. But other than that, this is a really fun light plane, and I think their World War I planes are always going to be good because they're cheap, they're easy to build, they don't really take too much time, maybe an hour or so, if that, depending on your building prowess. But anyway, yeah, so not much to say about this. It's just a really fun build, and I think they did a good job. So on to the history. So the Nieuport company was a French company that was established before the war, and they were mostly focused on making racing planes, because in France racing was, like, airplane racing was extremely big. In fact, France had the biggest intrigue into aviation at the time. If you look at how the French were really the only people not accepting the fact that the Wright brothers were the first to fly, until the Wright brothers went over there and like, hey, it does fly. So yeah, the French are very proud with their aviation at this time. And Nieuport was taken, the main designer was taken over by Gustave Delage. And Delage was really into this concept of what's called a sesquiplane. Now, a sesquiplane basically it looks like a biplane. Like, you got the top wing, you got the bottom wing, it looks like a biplane. Although it's not technically a biplane, because this lower wing here is like a half wing. As you can tell, it's half the size of the top wing. So this sesquiplane idea was really prominent when it came to Delage. His original sesquiplanes were the Nieuport 10 and the Nieuport 11, which the Nieuport 11, also known as the Bebe, was the French fighter against the Eindecker in the Fokker Scourge, and it didn't really do well compared to the interrupted gear of the Eindecker. So he takes the Bebe and he enlarges it, so makes it longer, wider, gave it a more powerful engine, a 110 horsepower Leron 9J rotary engine. It's a 9-cylinder rotary engine, and gives it a interrupted machine gun in the front here, with the Alken-Hami synchronization gear, which they took from the Germans when the Germans finally let one of their Eindeckers fly over the lines and gets shot down, and were able to get the plant, look at it, reverse engineer it, and make their own interrupted gear. Now, the Nieuport would only have one gun standard. At this point, even some Eindeckers would have two guns by the end of its production run in 1915, 1916, before the Albatros D3s would come in and take over as the main fighter, and the Faust D3s, and both of those have two Spandau synchronized machine guns, while the Nieuport only had one. Although they would have an optional top-mounted Lewis gun, but the top-mounted Lewis gun, you have a separate aim of fire, so you have one right in front of you and one on top, and two, you had to reload this. This would have like 300 to 500 rounds of ammunition, just constantly fed in this, you'd have to reload the pan on top, which is going to cause some issues because you could be firing both of them at the same time, and then suddenly you run out of ammunition on one, and you either have to focus with this one or you have to break off, reload, and try to go again. Depends on who you ask. But in the end, the Nieuport 17 would, whenever it was introduced in March of 1916, this would officially end the Fokker scourge, which the Germans were kind of freaking out, because now the French have a really good aircraft, like, being produced. They have a really prominent aircraft to go against the Fokkers. So Germany actually implored the Albatross company to copy the Nieuport, and all other companies too. Actually, some of them did. Siemens, Schuckert, and Euler, they both would do pure copies of the Nieuport, but Albatross would take the Nieuport's design philosophy and tweak it to make the Albatross D3, which would eventually outclass the Nieuport here. So the Germans would actually go to the extent of copying this aircraft, which is how much they feared it. And it's not the first, and it definitely won't be the last time, especially when it comes to like the Fokker Dreidecker, or the DR-1. That was also copied from an Allied aircraft. So this thing really changed it for the French. It gave them some air superiority, but in the end, like, the Germans would easily come up with something to outmatch it. So this thing also came with its flaws, which the Germans would also find out and completely ignore. The biggest flaw involves this right here. This is what's called a V-type strut, because it looks like a V. Now, there were basically two types of struts you would see on biplanes. You had the V-type strut and a parallel type strut, which is something on the Sopwith Camel, which I'll go over later. Now, the biggest problem with this is you have the two wing spars on the top, and you have one wing spar on the bottom of this sesquiplane. So instead, you can't do the parallel strut because you don't have that second spar on the bottom to connect the wings. So the only thing you could do was take the two spars on top and converge them down to this single spar in the center. It worked, but it comes with a big cost of strength. Now, you can even kind of see it with this. You can easily twist this, which was the problem of the Nieuport. The bottom wing would easily twist. It would twist on that single spar. So whenever you're in high G maneuvers, say you're in a dogfight and you decide to go like this, you're putting a lot of stress on that lower wing. Or if you go into a high-speed dive, you're putting a lot of stress on this lower wing, or half wing, whatever you want to call it. So all that stress you're putting on this wing will eventually pile up. So the more you fly it, the more stress you put on it, the more it's going to break. So it all depends. If both of them break, then you basically have a parasol monoplane where you can still kind of fly. It's just going to be really difficult. But I mean, still, losing any kind of wing is absolutely terrible. So they've tried doing some fixes, and the Germans would find this out with their Albatross D3s and eventually D5s, who would also adopt the V-strut system. And they would try doing some wire brace fixings and all that, trying to strengthen it in the towards the fuselage. But in the end, and which is why you never see it, you don't see it today, the V-strut is just not as strong as a parallel strut. And that's just the way it is. But as long as you stay within the parameters of the maneuverability and don't go into a high-speed dive, it was still a fast, lightweight plane, which is the advantage of this. This is a lot more lightweight than some of the other aircraft similar to its size. Say the Sopwith Camel. The Sopwith Camel was a lot heavier. So this thing could have a smaller, lighter engine and yet still be really fast because it doesn't have as much weight. I didn't mention this, but one of the details I really like is the fact that they got the right roundel for the French, because some people don't even notice that the French and the British have different roundels. The British is blue, white, and red. The French is red, white, and blue. And the way I always remember it is the French have blue in the center because they're cold-hearted. Sorry to the French, but that's an easy way to remember it. So the Nieuport 17 would go on to be declared one of the best fighters of the Allies during the war because of how devastating it was to the Germans when it initially came out, and its mainstay throughout the rest of the war. I mean, it would eventually be replaced by the Spad 7 in 1917, and the Nieuport 24 and the Nieuport 28 would come out as well, which basically improves upon this, but it's the same basic design. So, it's like, basically if you were to have the same model going through, it just give it a different name. But 3,600 of these would be built, and they would be flown by many great aces, including Georges Guynemer, Charles Nungesser, Albert Paul, plenty of Billy Bishop. Plenty of these aces have flown a Nieuport 17. In fact, Albert Ball enjoyed his Nieuport 17 so much that whenever his squadron had to be transitioned over to SE-5s, the British aircraft, whenever they finally were able to make their own aircraft that were decent, they were transitioning to SE-5s. Albert Ball wanted to keep his Nieuport. Well, at first, he was the top ace of Britain, so they complied and okay, just keep the SE-5 on standby. But then his Nieuport would be damaged, and he would have to fly his SE-5. And the first mission on his SE-5, he gets killed. There's still a little debate on whether or not he was shot down, or if he froze his carburetor, I think is the main story going on. But either way, Lothar von Richthofen, the Red Baron's brother, would claim the kill of Albert Ball. And, there's a lot of things about superstition about how Albert Ball wanted to keep his Nieuport. And the only time he didn't have his Nieuport, he would get killed. So, you can take that as you will. So, the Flyboys movie, which I'm not exactly a huge fan of, I just wanted this for the Nieuport. The movie itself, I could honestly really not care too much about because there's a lot of other great World War I aviation movies, including the Red Baron, the 2008 Red Baron, and the Blue Max, which the Blue Max is really good. There's also Dawn Patrol with Errol Flynn. Plenty of better World War I aviation movies out there. But the movie Flyboys, they kind of take liberties when it comes to the true effectiveness of the Nieuport 17 when it comes to the Escadrille Lafayette. Because the Escadrille Lafayette would get these aircraft. But there was only one ace that actually came out from the Escadrille de Lafayette, not like 2 or 3 of them like in Flyboys. So, you know, creative liberties. Also, not every triplane is red with only one black triplane, which that still irks me. And yes, I did get the other Flyboys of the Black Falcon, so whenever I get that built, you'll be able to see it along with the Red Baron triplane I have. But I rambled on long enough. This was a really great airplane, really fun to build, and I think if it comes, it might still be on their website. I'm not sure, but if it is, go ahead and get one, because this is a fun little build, easy to make, easy to fly around. You don't have to fold up the landing gear or anything like that, so you can easily just take it off, fly it around. So if you enjoyed the history, if you learned anything, leave a like and leave a comment. Subscribe if you want to see more, because I now have 79 different kits coming in. So I recently just bought one, so I have 79 kits, and there's going to be a lot more. And I'm also going to probably have to come back and maybe do a full World War I set or a full World War II set with the more I get. So, you know, we'll see where it goes. But anyway, with that said, I've been Fulcrum Man. This has been Brick Built History, and let's continue to build history.